Hello, and welcome to Graywood Gardening. This is the lower terrace garden, and in the spring, I seeded this half of it with poppy seeds. And as you can see, that hasn't worked out so well. I didn't know what poppy seedlings looked like when they sprouted, so I was afraid to weed anything at first, because I was afraid I might pull up a poppy by accident. Well, after about a month, it became very clear that there were basically no poppies at all, just a hardy crop of weeds. And then, things got a little out of control. It does look like, though, we have a total of 2 poppies that grew from the hundreds of seeds planted here, which makes this half of the lower terrace garden a pretty solid failure this year. So I thought for this video, something that would be fun to do is look at all of the things that are going wrong in the various gardens. Because as gardeners, we tend to share a lot of pictures on Facebook and Instagram of all the things that are going well, but not necessarily the things that are going south, and we all have things that don't go well every year. For us, in addition to this half of the lower terrace garden, I also planted a bunch of Autumn Beauty sunflowers on the far side of the lower terrace garden, and they all got eaten by deer when they were about a foot high. Most of them died. A few of them are actually branching and trying to grow again. We'll see if they make it or if the deer come through to finish them off. Our veggie garden is doing just terribly, and we knew it was going to be a rough year for the veggie garden because we didn't get it planted out until the end of June, and about a week after we got it planted out, we got hit with that 90-degree weather and humidity, so it's been really rough on those guys. And even our wildflower meadow, which for the most part has been a rousing success, has like some inexplicable areas that are not doing well at all. Of course, it's not all bad news. For everything that goes wrong, there are plenty of things that are going well. In fact, here in the lower terrace garden, where we have no poppies and nothing but weeds, the other half of it I seeded with zinnias, and those zinnias are growing strong, and here at the end of July, they are beginning to bloom. So, let me take you over to the meadow and show you what's going on there, but first, I gotta finish pulling all the weeds out of this garden. The wildflower meadow in front of the house was actually all forest last year. We had a bunch of the trees pulled back away from the house, and then this spring I rented a tractor with a tiller attachment. I tilled this whole area under, and then I seeded it thickly with wildflower seeds, a mix of annuals and perennials. And for the most part, this has worked out fantastically well. We have a beautiful wildflower meadow, we have tons of annuals blooming, it's filled with bees and butterflies, but not every place in this meadow is doing so great. In addition to seas of flowers, we also have some of these huge swaths that are almost exclusively grass, which is really strange because this used to be a forest just last year and there wasn't really much grass growing here. This got me so paranoid that I actually got some of the leftover wildflower seed and I germinated it in a tray because I was afraid there might be grass seed mixed in, and there wasn't. It was all wildflowers. This is just how much grass seed was sitting in the seed bank of the forest, just waiting for the right conditions to sprout and grow. Now, there are some wildflowers here growing up in the thick grass areas, and maybe we'll have some perennials that are getting established, and next year they'll take up a lot more space. But typically in the battle between grass and wildflowers, it's the grass that's gonna win. So I think that some large grassy patches is just going to be part of the character of our wildflower meadow in the future. And that's not such a bad thing. One of the strangest failures in the wildflower area is we have a couple of these huge patches where nothing is growing at all. Now, I'm pretty confident this isn't due to poor seeding, because I seeded going in one direction then the other direction to make sure we had a really good coverage. I'm also pretty sure it wasn't erosion that washed the seeds away, because like literally the hour after I seeded, we got a super gentle rain that lasted all day. It was perfect seeding conditions. My hunch is what happened is these were the locations of some very, very large trees. You can see a lot of the wood chips from where they were cut down. And something about these large trees and tree roots here made this soil just not good soil for growing in. So I think the solution for these areas is going to be, come spring or maybe this fall, put down a couple of inches of compost over the entire bare area, and then reseed them with a wildflower mix. And I betcha everything grows fine then. In fact, that might also make it a couple of areas with no grass at all, which would be fantastic. Still, it's the strange graywood crop circles. The peppers in the veggie garden are doing really well. In fact, we're getting some really large peppers that if we wanted green peppers, we could just about pick in another week or so. The hot peppers are also doing good. In fact, the cayenne peppers are beginning to turn red. Unfortunately, that's about the only success story in the veggie garden so far. The worst news in the whole garden is actually the tomatoes. Let's go take a look. Well, these tomatoes are basically as good as dead. These are all of our indeterminate tomatoes here. The actual Oregon Spring determinate guy is doing a little bit better in the sense that he's not dead yet, but he's certainly not flourishing. Now, I think there's two problems with the tomatoes. The first of which is just that they were too big, they were too mature, and we planted them way too late. So despite hardening them off for about a week and a half, by the time we got them planted in the garden, it was like 90 degrees and humid. It was just a really, really rough start for them. I started to notice some other problems in the garden. Specifically, we can see on a lot of the pumpkins and the melons, the leaves are starting to turn yellow. In fact, we could see that on our squash, and we're even seeing it now on the corn. And we're seeing the bottom leaves turning yellow first. This is the classic symptom of nitrogen deficiency. So, to correct a nitrogen deficiency, if you're doing organic gardening, the standard thing you would do is use blood meal. So blood meal is in fact basically dry granulated blood. It is a byproduct from the meat industry, and it is super, super high in nitrogen. Like this is 14% nitrogen. And the idea is you can just mix this into the surface of the soil, water it in, and it will slowly break down over time, providing basically a slow release nitrogen that'll release over the course of a few months. The two downsides of using blood meal is, number one, you can't actually use it on seedlings because it's so high in nitrogen, it could actually burn them even though it is slow release. And number two, it doesn't actually necessarily give you available nitrogen instantly. It can take several weeks before the nitrogen becomes available to the plants. So the one other solution that I happen to have on hand is I have a very, very small container of, this is a liquid fertilizer that is seaweed and fish meal. But this is a 3-2-2 fertilizer, so it's got some nitrogen. I can mix this to about a half a cup of this with 2 gallons of water. I can feed that to plants directly and immediately make that nitrogen available to them. The downside is, I don't know, maybe this fall, I don't have enough of this to actually water everything that is showing signs of nitrogen deficiency. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to mix this up with some water and water as many things as I can. In particular, Mrs. Graywood has asked me to prioritize the zucchini and summer squash. She also asked me to prioritize we have one watermelon that has a couple little baby watermelons on it, and she really wants to make sure that that plant is okay. And then I think if I have anything left over, I really want to go and get into the corn, because I'm worried that the corn is too young to actually use the blood meal on. I think these tomato plants that are basically done, I am going to pull them up, and I am here and in all the other beds with larger plants, and including in between the basil, I'm going to try to work some blood meal in to actually hopefully correct the problem over time. That's the plan for today. It's hot, it's humid, it's miserable, but I'm going to try to save everything we can, right? That's kind of stinky. So if you'll recall, this is a garden where we planted lettuce seed and a little bit of carrot seed in the bottom. Normally, particularly in the summer, I would always start my lettuce seeds inside and then plant them out. My seed starting area was full, so I tried planting them out directly. It's just too hot to get germination. There are actually a few germinating here and there, but I think conditions are just too rough to have any hope of getting a good crop, and especially now knowing, as we know, that this soil is super nitrogen deficient. So I think what I'm going to do is spread the blood meal all over this bed, till the whole thing under with the hoe, and just give up on the lettuce and the couple carrots for now. And then maybe in a month from now, this bed will become the broccoli bed or the cauliflower bed, which is good because that'll give it time for that blood meal to start releasing and becoming available to the plants. So hopefully by the time we plant those out, this bed will be ready for them. Alright, now I just need to set the sprinkler and get everything watered in really good. Now the blood meal, like I said before, could take several weeks before it becomes available. So that means, assuming that nitrogen deficiency is the problem, which I think it is, what I'm going to want to do is get more of that fish and sea meal liquid fertilizer, and every few days, or at least once a week, apply that particularly to the squash that are really yellowing, and keep doing that spot treatment probably for the next 2 or 3 weeks, so at least 2 or 3 more applications. And then hopefully by then the blood meal begins to do its job and the nitrogen becomes available. So certainly a bunch of the tomatoes are gone, and the lettuce bed was probably a bad idea to start with, but hopefully we can save the squash, the pumpkins, the melons, and the corn. So here's hoping. What a miserable day for this work. Alright, the final gardening fail that I have for you today is actually these guys. These are dahlias that we potted up back in May with the idea of just giving them a little head start growing before it was warm enough to actually plant them outside. I set them in a south-facing window in my office, and then we completely forgot about them. These poor guys have been watered maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. They clearly haven't gotten enough light. They've been growing leaning against the window, and they can't even support their own weight. I've gone ahead and staked them, but honestly at this point, I'm not sure if it's worth trying to harden them off and get them planted out, or just write them off for the year. Well, if you have any gardening fails from your gardens this year, please let me know in a comment below that I'm not alone. Otherwise, next time we'll get back to the gardening successes. In fact, I think it might be time to do another garden tour as we get into August. So, until then, happy gardening.